The wedding march had already begun when the cathedral doors burst open with a sound like thunder. "Marry him, Felix." Every head turned. At the far end of the aisle, framed by rain and silver light, stood Hyunjin. His black suit was soaked, his blonde hair clung to his forehead, and his chest rose and fell as if he had run through the entire city to get there. At the altar, Felix froze. The bouquet trembled in his hands. For one suspended second, the world held its breath. The organ stopped. Guests whispered. Candles flickered in the vast cathedral, their flames dancing against stained glass windows painted with saints and angels. Outside, rain battered the old stone walls, but inside, all Felix could hear was Hyunjin's voice echoing through the sacred silence. "Please," Hyunjin said, his voice breaking. "If you walk away with him today, I will lose the only person I have ever loved." Felix's heart lurched so violently he thought he might collapse. Standing beside him, Minyu, the man he was supposed to marry, tightened his jaw. Minyu looked calm to everyone else, but Felix saw the storm in his eyes. Felix had dreamed of this day for months, the white roses, the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble aisle, the promise of safety. After years of loving someone who never stayed, Felix had convinced himself that love did not need to be passionate. It only needed to be steady. And Minyu was steady. Minyu was kind, respectful, dependable. Minyu would never disappear in the middle of the night. Minyu would never say, "I love you," and then leave without explanation. Minyu would never break Felix the way Hyunjin had. Yet now, as Hyunjin stood trembling beneath the cathedral doors, Felix felt the carefully built walls around his heart begin to crack. Because despite everything, some part of him had been waiting for this exact, impossible moment, waiting for Hyunjin to finally choose him. 2 years earlier, Felix and Hyunjin had been inseparable. They met during a charity art event in Seoul. Felix had arrived late, flustered and apologetic, carrying coffee for everyone. He accidentally spilled an iced Americano over a large canvas. Hyunjin, the artist responsible for the piece, should have been furious. Instead, he laughed. "Now it's abstract." That was the beginning. Felix learned quickly that Hyunjin was a contradiction. He was graceful but reckless, confident on stage, but deeply insecure when no one was watching. He painted until dawn and forgot to eat. He collected old vinyl records and slept with his curtains open so moonlight could reach his bed. Hyunjin loved intensely. He kissed Felix in the rain after midnight walks along the Han River. He sketched Felix's freckles as if they were constellations. He called him Sunshine in a tone so soft it made Felix's knees weak. For the first time in his life, Felix felt truly seen. But Hyunjin also carried shadows. His father was a powerful businessman who controlled every aspect of his life. The family expected Hyunjin to inherit the company, marry according to their wishes, and bury any relationship they considered unsuitable. Felix knew the pressure was immense, but he believed love was stronger. Until the night Hyunjin vanished. No explanation. No goodbye. Only a short text sent at 3:17 a.m. "I'm sorry." "Forget me." Felix read those words until the screen blurred with tears. He waited for days, then weeks, then months. Hyunjin never returned. The heartbreak changed Felix. He stopped writing songs. He smiled less. He became careful with his heart, guarding it behind polite laughter and practiced indifference. Then Minyu entered his life. Minyu was an architect with warm eyes and a voice that never rose. He noticed when Felix was overwhelmed and silently placed tea in front of him. He remembered small things. Felix's favorite lavender candles, the way he hated thunderstorms, the exact amount of honey he liked in his coffee. Minyu did not demand anything. He simply stayed. And after a year, when he knelt beneath blooming cherry trees and asked Felix to marry him, Felix said yes. Not because he was consumed by passion, but because he wanted peace. Because he was tired of waiting for someone who had chosen silence. Yet in the quiet hours of the night, when rain tapped against the windows, Felix still dreamed of Hyunjin. He dreamed of unfinished conversations, of fingers intertwined, of a love that ended without a reason. Now that ghost stood before him in the flesh. "Felix," Hyunjin whispered, walking slowly down the aisle. "I know I don't deserve this chance." The guests parted as he passed. "I know I hurt you more than anyone ever should." His voice shook. "I left because my father threatened to destroy your career. He had people watching you. He said if I stayed, he would ruin everything you loved." Stared at him, tears gathering. Hyunjin stopped a few feet away. "I thought losing me would hurt less than losing your future." A sob escaped Felix's throat. "Then why didn't you come back?" he asked. Hyunjin's eyes glistened. "Because I was a coward. The confession landed with devastating honesty. Father became ill last year. Before he died, he told me he had spent his whole life controlling everyone because he was afraid to be alone. He said if there was someone I truly loved, I should run to them before it was too late. Hyunjin swallowed. I went to your apartment. His breath caught. You were gone. Your neighbor told me you were getting married today. Hyunjin's voice shattered. I came here because I couldn't live another day knowing I let you go without fighting. The cathedral blurred through Felix's tears. Minyu stepped forward. For a moment, Felix feared anger. Instead, Minyu looked at Hyunjin with quiet understanding. Then he turned to Felix. Do you love him? The question was gentle. Felix trembled. He looked at Minyu, the man who had offered him safety. Then he looked at Hyunjin, the man who had always been his greatest wound and his greatest love. The truth rose from the deepest part of his heart. Yes. The word was barely audible, but it changed everything. Minyu closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was sadness, but also peace. I knew, he said softly. I hoped time would change it. He took Felix's hands and kissed them. You deserve the kind of love that makes people run through storms. Began to cry harder. I'm sorry. Minho gave him a faint smile. Apologize for loving honestly. Stepped back from the altar. The guests watched in stunned silence as Minyu removed the ring from Felix's finger and placed it gently in Felix's palm. Go. Turned to Hyunjin. For a moment neither moved. Then Hyunjin reached out with trembling fingers. Felix took his hand. The contact sent a shock through both of them. Years of longing, grief, regret, and love collided in a single touch. Together, they walked out of the cathedral. Rain poured over them the instant they stepped outside. Felix laughed through tears. Hyunjin cupped his face. I am so sorry. His lower lip quivered. You broke me. I know. I hated you. I know. I never stopped loving you. Hyunjin let out a broken sob. Neither did I. Then Felix pulled him close and kissed him. The kiss was desperate and trembling, soaked in rain and forgiveness. It tasted of salt and tears and years lost to fear. Hyunjin held him as if he were the most precious thing in the world, because he was. Months later, spring returned to Seoul. Cherry blossoms drifted outside the small art studio Hyunjin had opened near the Han River. Sunlight spilled across canvases, unfinished portraits, and the scent of paint and fresh coffee. Felix sat by the window, composing melodies again. His laughter filled the room. Hyunjin looked up from his canvas and smiled. Felix was wearing one of Hyunjin's oversized sweaters, sleeves covering his hands. The silver necklace Hyunjin had given him glinted softly against his skin. Come here, Hyunjin said. Felix crossed the room. Hyunjin knelt. Felix's eyes widened. Cathedral, Hyunjin murmured. No audience, no fear. Opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple ring. Only me choosing you the way I should have from the beginning. Slipped down Felix's cheeks. Will you marry me? Felix laughed, crying at the same time. Hyunjin slid the ring onto his finger. Felix fell into his arms. Outside, the wind carried petals across the river like tiny promises. Inside, two hearts finally found their way home. Their wedding took place at sunset beside the Han River, surrounded by close friends and the people who truly loved them. No grand chandeliers, no expectations, only golden light, soft music, and vows spoken with trembling voices. When Felix walked down the aisle this time, he did not feel uncertainty, only love. As they exchanged rings, Hyunjin whispered, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I will never let you go again. Smiled through tears. You already did. The moment you came back. A sky painted in pink and gold, they kissed as applause rose around them. And for the first time, Felix understood that love was not about choosing between safety and passion. True love was both. It was the courage to return, the strength to forgive, and the miracle of being chosen, fully and fearlessly, by the one person your heart had never forgotten. The first morning Felix woke up as Hyunjin's husband. He opened his eyes to the sound of rain tapping softly against the studio windows. For one disoriented second, he thought he had dreamed everything. The rushed confession in the cathedral, the kiss in the storm, the cherry blossoms drifting along the Han River, the vows spoken with trembling voices. Then he felt a warm arm around his waist. Hyunjin was asleep behind him, his breathing slow and even, his face half buried in Felix's shoulder. His blonde hair was messy, and there was a faint smear of blue paint on his wrist that no amount of scrubbing had managed to remove. Felix smiled. He turned carefully, studying the man who had once shattered his heart and then crossed every distance to piece it back together. The silver wedding band gleamed on Hyunjin's finger. Real, all of it was real. As if sensing Felix's gaze, Hyunjin's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he simply looked at Felix with an expression so full of tenderness that Felix's chest tightened. "Good morning, husband," Hyunjin whispered, his voice rough with sleep. Felix laughed softly. "I was starting to think you only married me for my songwriting royalties." Hyunjin pretended to consider it. "Well, that and your freckles," leaned forward and kissed him. The kiss was warm and unhurried, carrying the kind of intimacy built not from perfection, but from survival. When they finally separated, Hyunjin rested his forehead against Felix's. "You're still here." The words were almost too quiet to hear. Felix's smile softened. "Where else would I be?" Hyunjin closed his eyes, relief washing over his face. Even after months of healing, there were moments when fear still crept into him, moments when he woke expecting an empty bed and another chance lost forever. Felix understood that fear because he carried his own. Some nights when Hyunjin worked late and forgot to answer his phone, Felix felt old wounds reopen. His heart would race. His hands would shake. But now, instead of hiding those fears, they spoke about them. They had promised each other honesty. No more disappearing, no more silence, only truth, even when truth was painful. That afternoon, while rain blurred the city beyond the windows, Felix found Hyunjin standing before a blank canvas. He was holding a brush, but he had not painted a single stroke. Felix approached quietly. "What are you thinking about?" Hyunjin exhaled. "The day I left." Heart tightened. Hyunjin stared at the untouched canvas. "I still hate the version of me who thought losing you was an act of love." Stepped closer until their shoulders touched. "That version of you was afraid. I hurt you." "Yes." Hyunjin lowered his head. Felix took the brush from his hand and set it aside, then he cupped Hyunjin's face. "You came back." Filled Hyunjin's eyes. "I'll spend my whole life making up for it." Kissed his forehead. "You don't have to earn my love." Hyunjin's voice trembled. "Then why do I still feel like I'm waiting for you to realize you deserve better?" Felix smiled sadly. "Because you still haven't forgiven yourself." The truth settled between them. Hyunjin let out a shaky breath and wrapped his arms around Felix. "I'm trying," held him tighter. "I know." Weeks later, an invitation arrived in the mail. It was from Minyu. Felix stared at the elegant handwriting for several seconds before opening it. Inside was a note. "I'm opening my first architectural exhibition next Friday. It would mean a lot if you both came. No bitterness, no resentment, only grace." Felix looked up at Hyunjin. "Should we go?" Hyunjin nodded. "If you want to." The night of the exhibition, the gallery glowed with warm light. Models of buildings stood beneath glass cases. Sketches lined the walls. Guests moved quietly through the elegant space. At the center of the room stood Minyu. When he saw them, he smiled. A genuine smile. Felix felt tears sting his eyes. "Thank you for coming," Minyu said. Felix embraced him. "I'm proud of you." Minho stepped back and turned to Hyunjin. For a moment, the two men who had loved Felix faced each other, then Minyu extended his hand. "Take good care of him." Hyunjin clasped it firmly. "With my life." Minho's lips curved. "I know." That night, as they walked home beneath city lights reflected in rain-soaked streets, Felix slipped his hand into Hyunjin's. "I used to think losing someone meant the end of everything," he said. Hyunjin squeezed his fingers. "Now," Felix looked up at him. "Now I think love can change shape and still remain beautiful." Hyunjin stopped walking. Under the glow of a street lamp, he kissed Felix slowly. "I love the way your heart finds kindness even after it's been hurt." Smiled. "And I love the way you came back." A year passed. Their studio flourished. Hyunjin's paintings were exhibited internationally. Felix's music returned with more honesty than ever before. Their home became a place of creativity, laughter, and late-night ramen eaten on the floor. There were ordinary moments that felt extraordinary. Hyunjin painting while humming off-key. Felix writing lyrics with his feet tucked under Hyunjin's legs. Shared umbrellas, shared silence, shared dreams. Then on a cool autumn evening, Felix stood in the studio doorway holding a small white envelope. His hands trembled. "Hyunjin." Hyunjin turned from his easel. The moment he saw Felix's expression, concern crossed his face. "What happened?" Felix laughed and cried at once. He handed him the envelope. Hyunjin opened it. His eyes scanned the paper, then widened. He looked up, speechless. Felix wiped tears from his cheeks. "We're going to be parents." For several seconds, Hyunjin could not move. Then he dropped the paper and crossed the room in 3 hurried steps. He fell to his knees before Felix, pressing both hands to his stomach as if protecting the fragile miracle already growing there. His shoulders shook. Felix threaded his fingers through Hyunjin's hair. "You're crying." Hyunjin laughed through tears. "I'm overwhelmed." He pressed a trembling kiss to Felix's stomach. "Hello, little one." began to sob. Hyunjin looked up, eyes shining. Child will never wonder if they are loved. Knelt and wrapped his arms around him, because they'll have you. You. Months later, in the quiet hours before dawn, their daughter entered the world. She had Felix's freckles and Hyunjin's expressive eyes. When the nurse placed her in Hyunjin's arms, he stared at her as if he were looking at the universe itself. She's perfect, he whispered. Felix, exhausted and radiant, reached for his hand. Hyunjin kissed his knuckles. Thank you for giving me a life I once thought I didn't deserve. Smiled weakly. You deserved love the moment you learned how to fight for it. Years later, their daughter would run through the art studio with paint on her fingers and music in her laughter. She would grow up watching her parents dance in the kitchen, argue gently about color palettes, and kiss whenever they thought no one was looking. She would know that love was not flawless. It was brave. It was patient. It was honest. And on quiet rainy mornings, when Felix woke beside the man who had once arrived at a cathedral and changed the course of his life, he would trace the wedding ring on Hyunjin's hand and remember the words that saved them both. Don't marry him. At the time, those words had sounded like chaos, but they had become the beginning of everything.
When their daughter turned 5, she asked a question that left both Felix and Hyunjin silent. Appa, she said, sitting cross-legged on the studio floor with paint on her cheeks, how did you know you were supposed to marry Daddy? The late afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, turning the room gold. Music drifted softly from Felix's piano. Outside, autumn leaves skated across the sidewalk beside the Han River. Hyunjin looked up from his canvas. Felix stopped playing. Their daughter, Yuna, blinked at them with wide, curious eyes. The same luminous eyes Hyunjin had fallen in love with years ago when he first looked into Felix's. Felix smiled and lifted her into his lap. That, he said softly, is a very long story. Yuna tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and rested her head against his chest. I like long stories. Hyunjin crossed the room and sat beside them on the floor, his shoulder pressed against Felix's. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Felix began. There was a time when Daddy and I loved each other very much, but we were scared. Yuna frowned, scared of monsters. Hyunjin chuckled and kissed the top of her head. People can be more frightening than monsters. Nodded, we made mistakes. We hurt each other, and for a while we thought our story was over. Yuna looked between them, but it wasn't. No, Felix whispered, because love came back. Yuna considered this seriously, as if storing the lesson in the secret chambers of her young heart, then she smiled. I'm glad. Hyunjin reached for Felix's hand. So am I. Years passed like pages turning in a beloved book. Yuna grew taller. Her laughter became deeper, her paintings more ambitious, her piano melodies more intricate. She inherited Felix's gentle heart and Hyunjin's artistic soul. The studio changed too. Crayon drawings joined Hyunjin's canvases. Small ballet shoes appeared by the door. Family photographs filled the shelves. One showed Felix in Hyunjin's arms on their wedding day, both of them smiling through tears. Another captured newborn Yuna sleeping on Hyunjin's chest. A third showed the three of them covered in paint, laughing so hard none of them could stand. Their life was imperfect, but beautifully so. There were sleepless nights and missed deadlines, arguments over schedules and whose turn it was to cook dinner. There were moments when old insecurities resurfaced. Sometimes Hyunjin still woke from dreams where Felix disappeared. Sometimes Felix still felt a flash of fear when Hyunjin came home late. But every time doubt appeared, they chose the same thing: conversation, honesty. Each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hyunjin asked Felix to meet him at the cathedral where everything had changed. Felix stepped inside and froze. The pews were empty. Candles flickered softly. White roses lined the aisle exactly as they had on the day he almost married someone else. At the altar stood Hyunjin, dressed in a black suit, holding a single bouquet. Yuna, now 15 and grinning proudly, hid near the organ. Felix covered his mouth as tears filled his eyes. Hyunjin walked toward him. I wanted to rewrite this memory, he said. Felix laughed through tears. You already did. Hyunjin shook his head, not completely. Took Felix's hands. 10 years ago I interrupted a wedding because I was afraid to lose you. Voice trembled. Today I'm here because I still choose you, not from fear but from gratitude. Felix's tears spilled over. Hyunjin knelt. Yuna gasped dramatically from the back, making Felix laugh even harder. Hyunjin smiled up at him. Felix Yongbok Lee, thank you for giving me a second chance, a family and a home. If I were given 1,000 lifetimes, I would search every one of them until I found you. Opened a velvet box. Inside was a ring set with a tiny yellow diamond that sparkled like captured sunlight. Will you marry me again? Felix was crying too hard to answer at first, then he nodded. Yes. Hyunjin slipped the ring onto Felix's finger and rose to kiss him. Yuna ran down the aisle, throwing flower petals she had hidden in her pockets. You have to kiss longer. She shouted. They laughed into the kiss. The years continued to unfold. Yuna left for university in Paris to study art and music. The day she departed, Felix cried in the airport terminal while Hyunjin held him close. "She'll come back," Hyunjin whispered. "I know," Felix said, wiping his eyes. "I'm just realizing how fast time moves." When they returned home to the quiet studio, the silence felt unfamiliar. For the first time in years, it was only the two of them again. They rediscovered old habits, midnight walks by the Han River. Slow dancing in the kitchen, painting and composing until sunrise. One winter evening, snow drifted beyond the windows while Felix sat at the piano. His fingers moved over the keys, playing the melody he had written after Hyunjin ran into the cathedral all those years ago. When he finished, he turned to find Hyunjin watching him with tears in his eyes. "What is it?" Felix asked. Hyunjin crossed the room and took his hands. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." Smiled. "It's our life." Hyunjin pressed a kiss to his forehead. "And it is the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me." Decades later, when silver threaded their hair and laughter lines deepened around their eyes, the studio remained full of color. Grandchildren raced between canvases, photographs multiplied across the shelves, music still drifted through the rooms. Love still lived in every corner. On a rainy morning not unlike the one after their wedding, Felix woke before dawn. Hyunjin slept beside him, older now but no less beautiful. Felix traced the familiar features he had memorized over a lifetime. Hyunjin stirred and opened his eyes. "Good morning, husband," he whispered. Felix smiled. "Good morning." They lay together in the soft grey light, listening to rain on the windows. After all the years, the words still came as easily as breathing. "I love you." Hyunjin touched Felix's cheek. "I would still run through the storm for you." His eyes glistened. "And I would still choose you." Outside, the rain continued to fall, gentle and steady. Inside, two hearts that had once nearly lost each other beat in perfect rhythm. Their story had begun with an interrupted wedding and a desperate confession. It became a life filled with art, music, forgiveness, and unwavering devotion. And even as time moved forward, one truth never changed. In every season, in every lifetime, in every version of the world, Felix and Hyunjin always found their way back to each other. Years after that quiet rainy morning, when their hair had turned completely silver and their hands trembled slightly with age, Felix and Hyunjin still began each day the same way. Felix would wake first. He would turn toward the man beside him and study the face that had become his favorite landscape. The gentle lines at the corners of Hyunjin's eyes, the faint scar near his chin. The peaceful expression that appeared only when he was asleep. Then Felix would whisper, "Good morning, husband." And Hyunjin, no matter how deeply he slept, always smiled before opening his eyes. One spring afternoon, a letter arrived from Paris. The envelope was thick, addressed in Yuna's elegant handwriting. Inside was a photograph. Yuna stood in front of her first major exhibition, surrounded by her paintings and musical scores. Beside her were her husband and their two children, both grinning proudly. There was a note. "I learned what love looks like by watching the two of you. Thank you for teaching me that true love is not perfect, it is brave, forgiving, and faithful." Felix read the words aloud, his voice trembling. By the time he finished, tears streamed down both their faces. Hyunjin folded the letter carefully and pressed it to his chest. "We did well," he whispered. Felix rested his head on Hyunjin's shoulder. "Yes," he said softly. "We really did." That summer, their family gathered at the Han River. Grandchildren chased one another through the grass, their laughter carried by the warm evening breeze. Yuna sat at the piano in the open pavilion, playing one of Felix's old compositions. Paint-stained canvases leaned against trees, waiting for Hyunjin's touch. As the sun began to set, the sky blushed with the same pink and gold hues that had blessed their wedding day decades earlier. Hyunjin reached for Felix's hand. "Walk with me." They strolled slowly to the riverbank. The water shimmered in the fading light. For a long time neither spoke. They no longer needed words for every feeling. Silence itself had become a language they understood perfectly. Finally, Hyunjin turned to him. "Do you regret anything?" Felix thought about the years behind them, the heartbreak, the waiting, the interrupted wedding. The tears, the forgiveness, the ordinary mornings that became extraordinary simply because they were shared. He smiled. "Only the time we spent apart." Hyunjin's eyes glistened. "I would give anything to return those years to you." Squeezed his hand. "They brought us here." Looked toward their family gathered under the twilight sky. "They gave us this." Hyunjin leaned forward and kissed him with the same tenderness that had never faded. "Then I am grateful for every moment," he whispered. When winter came, Hyunjin's health began to decline. At first it was subtle. A lingering cough, fatigue, hands that tired too quickly while painting. Then came the diagnosis. Felix sat beside him in the hospital room, fingers intertwined, listening as the doctor explained that time was limited. The words seemed to echo from a great distance. When they were finally alone, Hyunjin stared at the white hospital sheets. "I'm not afraid of dying," he said quietly. Felix's throat tightened. Then what are you afraid of? Hyunjin turned to him, tears shining in his eyes. Leaving you. Climbed into the narrow bed and held him as he had countless times before. You will never leave me, he whispered. Hyunjin buried his face against Felix's shoulder and wept. The months that followed were filled with both sorrow and astonishing beauty. Family visited often. The studio became a sanctuary once more, filled with music, laughter, and stories. When Hyunjin grew too weak to paint, Felix brought canvases to his bedside and described every color he imagined. When Felix's tears threatened to overwhelm him, Hyunjin wiped them away with trembling fingers. One snowy evening, Hyunjin asked to be taken to the studio. Felix wrapped him in blankets and settled him beside the window. Outside, snowflakes drifted in silence. Inside, Felix sat at the piano and played the first melody he had written after the cathedral. When the final note faded, Hyunjin reached for his hand. Do you remember what I said when I interrupted your wedding? Felix nodded, tears already forming. Marry him. Hyunjin smiled weakly. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. The best. Hyunjin's thumb brushed Felix's wedding ring. If there is another life after this, I will find you again. Leaned forward until their foreheads touched. You won't have to search very hard. Hyunjin's eyes fluttered closed. I'll still run through the storm. Felix's tears fell onto their joined hands, and I'll still choose you. A few days later, before dawn, Hyunjin slipped away peacefully with Felix's hand in his. His final expression was serene, as if he had simply fallen asleep while listening to the voice he loved most. The grief that followed was vast and aching, yet even in the emptiness, Felix never felt truly alone. Hyunjin remained everywhere, in the scent of paint, in unfinished sketches, in songs composed at midnight. In the rain against the windows, years later, when Felix's own hair was white as snow and his steps had become slow, he returned one last time to the Han River. The evening sky glowed pink and gold. He sat on a bench overlooking the water, holding the weathered photograph from their wedding day. He traced Hyunjin's smiling face with trembling fingers. I'm coming home, he whispered. That night, Felix fell asleep with the photograph on his chest. And in his dream, the cathedral doors burst open once more. Rain poured behind a younger Hyunjin, eyes shining with love. He reached out his hand. Felix smiled through tears. You took your time. Hyunjin laughed, warm and familiar. I had to make sure the path was covered in flowers. Placed his hand in Hyunjin's, their fingers fit together as perfectly as they always had. No fear, no separation, no more goodbyes, only love. And as they walked toward the light side by side, the years between them dissolved like rain. Because some hearts are destined to find one another in every lifetime. And in every world, under every sky, whether in storms or in sunlight, Felix and Hyunjin were always meant to meet at the end of the aisle and choose each other forever. Long after time had lost its meaning, their story was still told. Yuna told it to her children and grandchildren on quiet evenings when rain tapped against the windows and the scent of paint and old sheet music filled the house by the Han River. She told them about a wedding that was stopped by love, about two men who were imperfect, frightened and stubborn, yet brave enough to return to one another, about forgiveness, about second chances, about a promise that outlived even death. The studio remained exactly as Felix and Hyunjin had left it. Canvases rested against the walls. A piano stood by the window. On the shelf beneath a framed photograph of their wedding lay 2 silver rings intertwined forever. Visitors often said the room felt warm, as if it still held laughter, as if music lingered in the air, as if love itself had chosen never to leave. Years passed and generations grew. But whenever rain fell over Seoul and the Han River shimmered beneath a silver sky, Yuna would look out the window and smile, because she could almost see them. Felix with his radiant freckles and gentle laughter. Hyunjin with paint-stained fingers and eyes full of devotion, walking side by side, hand in hand, still in love, still choosing each other, and somewhere beyond the reach of time, where no fear could follow and no goodbye could ever wound them again, Felix and Hyunjin were together. There was an endless field of white roses. A soft breeze carried cherry blossom petals through golden light. Music drifted like a familiar heartbeat. Hyunjin turned to Felix, just as he had on countless mornings. Good morning, husband. Smiled, the same smile that had once undone him in the most beautiful way. Good morning. They kissed, the world around them glowed brighter, no storms to outrun, no years to recover, no pain to forgive, only the quiet certainty that had always lived in their hearts, that love, when it is true, never really ends, it waits, it returns, it endures. And so their story closed not with sorrow but with peace, not with loss but with reunion, not with an ending but with a forever. Under an eternal sky painted in pink and gold, Felix and Hyunjin walked forward together, fingers intertwined, hearts at rest. And this time there were no interruptions, no fear, no distance, only love, only home, only each other, forever.